A U.S. official telling NBC News today that what we saw from Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov at the UN Security Council meeting was another sign of weakness. They're talking about how Lavrov only showed up for the meeting to say his piece, to give his speech, and then he left. In his remarks, he accused the U.S. of covering up Ukraine's crimes and called Ukraine a totalitarian Nazi-like state. Then he basically peaced out. Right after, Secretary of State Antony Blinken also spoke, or right before, rather, saying Ukraine literally, quite literally, is fighting for its future. Watch.
One man can end it. Because if Russia stops fighting, the war ends. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine ends.
It's coming as we're seeing some kind of extraordinary scenes out of Russia. People coming out by the thousands, Russians, to protest after Russian President Vladimir Putin called up more reservists to fight. More than 1,300 demonstrators have now been arrested. And look at what's happening at some of the borders of Russia. Tons of people lining up. They are desperate to get out. They are trying to get somewhere else. Erin McLaughlin joins us now. And Erin, everything that we're seeing overseas with Russia and Ukraine is against the backdrop now of what has gone down in New York at that General Assembly. Lavrov came in, said what he had to say, and then left, with Russia making clear this is not about dialogue at this point.
Yeah, that's right. In the view of Ukrainian officials I've been speaking to, Russian President Vladimir Putin is trying to create the perception that he's burning all bridges behind him, creating no other option but to press on with this brutal war. And he signaled that earlier this week in his announcement of his intention, essentially, to annex occupied territories here in Ukraine. If and when he does that, essentially, he's making it a constitutional obligation of the Kremlin to press forward with a full-scale war in defense of those territories as part of Russia. And Ukrainian officials I've been talking to say this is all part of the Kremlin posturing, trying to make it look as dangerous an option as possible for the West to continue its support for Ukraine, knowing full well that without Western support, Ukrainian forces would be in big trouble. Hallie.
It's also interesting, you know, as we talk about protests in Russia, we're seeing people trying to escape the country, some of them presumably hoping to avoid having to stay and get caught up in the fight. You're in Ukraine. This is an escalation by Russia now. How do they see it?
Well, I spent today with Ukrainian soldiers who were essentially patrolling this area of Ukraine not far from where I'm at now, Kharkiv. They took me inside of a Ukrainian church that had been converted by Russian forces into a field hospital and staging area, showing me this ransacked church, which essentially illustrated just how quickly Russian soldiers had to leave this area, leaving behind a whole treasure trove of equipment. I asked them about the additional 300,000 reservists that President Putin plans to call up and is now mobilizing, and they told me that this makes no difference to them, that they are going to continue on, and that those reservists, in their minds, will die. Take a listen.
A lot of people without good preparing, without good equipment, it's just fresh meat for us.
And we're hearing from Ukrainian officials, including President Zelensky, appealing directly to those Russian reservists that are reluctant to participate in this war, that are now being called up, saying that if they come here to Ukraine, urging them to surrender, that Ukrainians will welcome their surrender. Hallie.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.